we were asked to try to identify sources of funding in Oregon that could deliver. And the number has, I realize the latest cost estimate has fluctuated in terms of what's necessary to complete the design and engineering work. But the ask that we are seeking in terms of funding from Oregon is $20 million to complete that work. And the primary source of potential funding that we identified after receiving $5 million in funding from the legislature in 2021 was not another legislative allocation during this short session, but a portion of the federal funding that is coming from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the IIJA from the federal government. Over $1 billion of additional funding is coming to Oregon through the Oregon Department of Transportation over the next 5 years. And that money is flowing into a number of different pots in programs within ODOT and within the state government. The bridge project is not an eligible project for all those pots of money. But as we have sort of roughly calculated in looking at how this money is being directed and the federal guidance around use of this money, as much as $700 million of the money coming to Oregon could at least potentially be used to fund the design and engineering work for the Hood River Bridge project. And so we have, in the past couple of weeks, we have undertaken a series of meetings with legislators on the Joint Transportation Committee, legislators who have been supportive of the project over the last several years, and legislative leadership to talk about the Bi-State Bridge Authority legislation, which of course we are moving this short session in Oregon and in Washington, but then also using those meetings as an opportunity to talk about and contextualize the urgent need for additional funding for the project to complete the design and engineering work, and the goal of securing at least or roughly $20 million in funding for that design and engineering work from ODOT as they make decisions about how to allocate that IIJA money. And so thank you to Commissioner Fox and Mayor McBride who have participated in these meetings. It's powerful to have local elected officials who are from the region where this project is being done, who have that local expertise and perspective and are able to speak to the importance of that funding in the broader context and timeline for the project, and make that ask of legislators. And so this document in your materials kind of walks through that strategy, explaining how if we are trying to complete design and engineering work by the second quarter of 2026 and begin construction in the first quarter of 2027, how working backwards from that, we need to make sure that we have that $20 million in funding available, so that there is additional funding the port can pull from when the $15 million that has been allocated to the project so far from Oregon and Washington and the federal government to fund that first 30% of the design and engineering work is depleted in quarter one of 2024 or before that. And also explaining how increased project costs, and obviously part of that is due to inflation, but any increased costs and delays that increased costs are going to result in higher tolls and higher costs for residents. And so, we talked through that the Washington legislature has identified this project as a potential recipient of significant state investment as part of a 2023 transportation package, but how because of the timing needed to complete this design and engineering work, we need funding before that. And we talk them through the different pots of money that the project is potentially eligible for. And so the ask that we are making of Oregon legislators, since the investment decisions for how to spend this IIJA money are principally being made by the Oregon Transportation Commission in cooperation with ODOT. It's not, the legislature is not in charge of how the state is going to make those investments, or at least the timing of making these decisions is such that the legislature has limited ability to weigh in. So we are asking legislators to sign on to a letter that will go to the OTC and ODOT requesting that they direct $20 million of the IIJA money to the Hood River Bridge project for the design and engineering work. There are a couple important timelines as we look forward towards these IIJA investments, and they kind of frame the timeline of advocacy that we need to have. Oregon legislative session starts on February 1st. The next Region 1 ACT meeting, where hopefully we can get our Gorge Area ACT members to continue to advocate for funding for the bridge project with their fellow Region 1 ACT members, is on February 7th. February 17th is the first of two special Oregon Transportation Commission meetings on the IIJA funding allocations. And at that meeting, the commission will present their initial public input that they've received and their preliminary plans for spending that money and receive feedback. That will be an important opportunity to have some of you, regional elected officials, as well as residents of the Gorge area, local businesses, to testify both with written and oral testimony to show that there's really a groundswell of support for directing this funding to the design and engineering work. And then the second meeting is on March 30th. And that's when the Oregon Transportation Commission will be making their announcements for their final plans for allocating the IIJA money. And so that really shows we need to work quickly, and we've already had a number of positive meetings with Oregon legislators, but we really need to develop the legislative support for this allocation and get that letter to the Oregon Transportation Commission in early February, if not before, in order for that letter to be impactful. And then we need to continue to get legislators engaged and reaching out to ODOT to the extent that they're willing during the legislative session when they're all together, if we are going to make sure that the legislature has a meaningful impact on advocating for some of that IIJA funding to go to the port. So
Miles, would you be taking the lead at structuring and organizing this support letter?
That's right. Yes, I will be writing the letter. Obviously, we'll appreciate input from the port staff and from the bi-state working group to make sure that everybody feels like that letter is communicating our situation with the project and our ask in a clear and compelling way. And then certainly we'll also be calling on you and working with port staff to find folks who are willing to testify at that February 17th Oregon Transportation Commission meeting. And it does look like they just released the agenda. I have since added this to the strategy. They've since released the agenda for the January 20th Oregon Transportation Commission meeting. And they will be releasing some information at that meeting about what they're thinking for IIJA investments. That meeting is not going to be focused on IIJA, but it will give us an idea of some of the OTC's initial thinking and may better inform how we do our advocacy moving forward from there.
Excellent. Hey, I want to applaud Miles's efforts in the last, well, you've been around for a long time, but since I've known you associated with this, you got involved in this thing, and I know we switched and pushed around the priorities for you and upped the amount of money that we needed earlier. And I just want to applaud your efforts. You didn't just back away and give up. You pushed into it and came up with some ideas that we're trying to do. So I applaud your efforts. Great job.
Appreciate it.
Other comments?
I have an easy question. Miles, I think you said this, but I just want to make sure I got it right. I think what you said is that we're not looking for any actual legislative action during the short session. Instead, all the action is at the OTC. but the reason we're talking to legislators is to get their support at the OTC. Is that kind of the big picture?
Yeah, that's right, Commissioner. And I think I shouldn't say we aren't hoping for any legislative action, but ultimately the money that we're seeking and the decisions about how to spend that money are coming from the OTC. So one of the things we're trying to do is develop legislative awareness of, hey, this is a huge allocation of money, over $1 billion. Normally, when a state agency is spending money on this scale, the legislature has a significant amount of input in how that money is being spent. And because of the timeline that the OTC has set out for making decisions about this money, you're going to be in the legislative session and occupied with a number of other things while the OTC is making a lot of the decisions and plans about how this money is spent. But you all may want to weigh in and find an opportunity to put your thumb on the scale a little bit and give your 2 cents about how you would like to see the plans for those dollars develop. And so we'll see to the extent that we're successful. If the best we can do is a letter of support from legislators, I think that's a powerful signal. But the legislature will have to sign off on the decisions that ODOT and the Oregon Transportation Commission make. It's called, they have to approve an increase in their expenditure limitation. And usually that's just sort of a up and down vote. It will probably happen not during the legislative session, but during what's called an emergency board meeting, where there's a special committee of legislators and the state comes to them with a number of things they want to spend money on, and the legislature essentially reviews the list and says, okay, approved. So there is an opportunity for the legislature to to weigh in and to exert their influence over how ODOT spends that money. But it's they're unlikely to have the time or energy to actually develop the plans themselves, and they're probably going to be inclined to just sign off on ODOT's plan. So what we're hoping to do is create some energy around legislators saying, well, we don't want to sign off on your plan unless you give 20 million of these dollars to the Port of Foothills.
Okay, so I'm on the Association of Oregon Counties Legislative Committee. We had a meeting last week, and in the discussion about transportation, what our lobbyists told us is that they're not expecting anything on the transportation side and that we're not making any asks on the transportation side in the short session. So if you think that we should, through AOC, be looking at asking something, could you communicate that to me so I can do the right thing?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's an important distinction that I think almost nobody will be advocating for transportation funding asks through the legislature this session, because the legislature won't really be allocating any money. The question is whether we can get the legislature to advocate for ODOT to allocate some of that.
It's how you steer the IIJA money.
That's right.
Yeah,
and the extent that the legislature is willing to do that, they may not be willing to do that, but we're going to push them as hard as we can.
Great. I'll take your advice on that. Thanks.
Miles, I have a timing question. So the 17th, I'm not sure how you stated this, but what I'm trying to figure out is, have they made a preliminary list by the 17th of February already?
I believe that is the plan, yes.
So any advocacy letters really need to happen prior to the 17th of February?
That's correct.
Okay, all right, thanks.
And to that end, even though the meeting is not, the Transportation Commission meeting on this Thursday is not focused on IIJA, it would probably be worth getting a couple letters of testimony in, or one or more of you to testify during the public comment period at that meeting on Thursday if you are available. It's from 9:20 to 9:50. I realize it's short notice and folks are busy. They just came out the agenda, but I can coordinate with Kevin and Michael and at least put that on your radar. And I think, just the more times they hear from folks associated with this project, the better.
We do have a number of meetings that morning. I believe we've got Representative Bonham and Representative, yeah, I think Bonham at 9 o'clock. And let's see. That's the only Oregon rep that we've got that day. I think we do have a county emergency energy plan meeting. Commissioner Benton, we were hoping that you might be able to participate in that 9 o'clock meeting. Because I believe that Commissioner Fox and Mayor McBride will not be available that day.
Yeah, I'm going to try to be able to attend that meeting.
And so then I guess Miles, then perhaps after the Bonham meeting, then we could stick around if everybody's calendar allows and then transition into the OTC meeting.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
Okay, other items?
Well, I just have one question, I guess,
Yep,
or for Miles, somewhat along the lines of what Commissioner Babbitts was discussing, but all of the funding strategies or plans that we've put together show a substantial ask from the state of Oregon. So, and you kind of mentioned, obviously, in the short session, there's not going to be an infrastructure bill that's even going to be discussed. Have you had any conversations? When do you anticipate an infrastructure bill kind of starting, and when do you think that, or how do we advocate the legislature to be moving in that direction? And what's the timing like for something like that? Because I feel like if we miss the next long session and one doesn't happen in that session, we're out another couple of years beyond that even. What's the strategy to kind of get the legislature to start moving on that?
Let me jump in there and see if I can kind of expand on your thought there. So the 20 million we're talking about now helps us get through the design effort. And that's for a $500 million bridge, that's pretty small money. The next chunk of money that we're going to need is to support construction. And that's probably in the neighborhood of $420, $450 million in aggregate. And the plan is that we've got to seek money from Washington, from Oregon, and from the feds, and whatever's left over, we've got to go find that money, borrow it. When we need that money is somewhere in the 2026 area. We won't spend it until we get into 27, 28, 29, and 30. But you want to be able to show that you've got access to those kinds of funds when you award the construction contract at the end of 26. So what you're asking is, how do we get ready to tap what we really need, the big money, and how do we make sure that we got the ore in the water at the right time to go after that money?
Yeah, I guess it seems like that's a long way out, but when you look at the number of sessions between now and then, an infrastructure bill could get passed in. It's just a couple, and then you look at the size of the ask we're going to have. I guess our entire funding structure right now relies on a big number happening, and I just want to know what the appetite of the legislature is to, at some point in the next 3 or 4 years, have an infrastructure bill push.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Commissioner Benton. We are going to need that package to pass and allocate, in the neighborhood of $100 million to the Hood River Bridge in Oregon in 2023, or Commissioner Fox is giving me the higher sign, or in 2025. I think it is more likely that package will come in 2025. And the reason for that is that a number of the main projects that were being funded in the 2017 package, namely the Rose Quarter project, the I-205 project, Highway 217 in the Portland metro area, have not broken ground yet. And there is a lot of frustration from legislators, particularly from legislators outside the Portland metro area, who took a tough vote to increase the gas tax to fund those projects, that those projects have not really made a ton of forward progress since. And there's going to need to be some tangible, noticeable progress on those projects before a lot of those legislators are going to have the appetite to take another tough vote to increase the gas tax or increase funding for transportation. However, because it's sounding more likely that there will be a major transportation package in Washington in 2023, and that Washington is putting a substantial amount of funding towards the I-5 bridge project, that does put pressure on the Oregon legislature to respond in kind and to put forward $1 billion or more towards the I-5 bridge project. And so that may be the impetus for them doing something in 2023. And our goal will be to drum up the legislative support and urgency for the bridge, for the Hood River Bridge project, that look, if you are going to move a major transportation package, whether it's a much broader package in 2025 or an I-5 bridge focused package in 2023, you need to include funding for the Hood River Bridge as part of that package. And that's going to be the message that we're delivering in these legislative meetings we're doing now, in the interim after the 2022 session, going into 2023.
So to me, in support of that, we need a financial plan, if we will. And I was assuming we would get this new management contract heavily involved in that in this first year to help us craft such a plan that shows them we're in competition with the I-5. There's certain things we could perhaps accelerate and actually get people on the ground working and achieving things. And I think we would have a better chance of attracting some of that money earlier. It's fine if we can get a chunk of money in 23, another chunk of money in 24, and the balance of it in 25. That's cool. We'll take whatever we can get, but I sure hate to miss an opportunity. And we look back at it and go, boy, I wish we would have done that. So any other items for Graham? Can we move forward?
Yeah, Brad is here along with Miles, but the next item is the Bridge Authority legislation update. Miles, you can take a breather, and I'll let Brad give an update on the Bridge Authority legislation. Many of the bi-state working group members on the Washington side have been actively involved. So Brad, if you've got a moment.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. First, again, I did it a little earlier, but I want to again thank Bob and Marla and Jacob and Kevin for testifying last Thursday. We had the hearing on the Bridge Authority bill. It went really well. Senator King was really happy. He called me afterwards and was really appreciative to all of you and your time on that. When I talked to him, he's hoping to try and get that legislation passed out of committee sometime later this week. I think that's a little overly ambitious. I think it'll be at least another probably 2 weeks before it actually starts moving out of committee. For us, we have a 60-day session this year, so we have a little more time than Oregon. Steve Siegel, I sent the proposed edits to him. He is sending those on to staff to hopefully get those worked into the bill for amendments when it comes out of committee. I have not heard or seen any questions or opposition to the bill at this point. The chair of the committee is a co-sponsor on the bill, so if there are problems, we should hear something about that. We continue to have legislative meetings with individual legislators. Those should be popping up on your calendar. Folks, if you can make those are great. Appreciate it. Just so everybody knows, you don't have to, if there are other scheduling conflicts or things like that, it's okay to miss some. But again, love to have you. I just don't want people to feel like if you miss one or two of those, the sky is going to fall. It will not. We are also, just to get into the funding question, there is still a lot of discussion around trying to create a transportation package for Washington this year. I'm still a little skeptical that there's going to be enough momentum to put something together in the short session. That said, there is a desire to figure out how to. Last year, there was a very large climate-based bill called, well, we called it cap and invest legislation, but it's basically a cap and trade, which is supposed to have a significant chunk that is going to be programmed for transportation. That legislation, combined with some of the federal resources, may spur an effort to try and actually put a broader package together that could be focused in and around at least some resource going to bridges. Senator King is actively working on trying to secure, his goal is at least $100 million. And that's the number that's been put out, at least on Senate versions of transportation packages before. We're trying to plus that up as much as possible, but that is the number that's being worked on if or when a package does come together. Based on the earlier conversation relative to Oregon, any transportation package that does happen will also have a significant chunk for the Columbia River crossing. That is a pretty well defined, that's a must have for Washington if a transportation package does come together. Either way, there's always attention being paid. We are doing everything we can to build the profile of this project. So if or when a Washington package does come together, that we are in the queue for those resources. Senator King, even though he is in the minority up in Washington, is very well positioned to try and secure Washington-based resources for those. Again, I want to create an under promise, over deliver scenario if or when anything does come together, but we are doing everything we can right now to position ourselves for something to happen. And the enabling legislation for the work crew, or for the authorizing by state bridge authority, is moving.
So Brad, this is Commissioner Fox. What's your thoughts on attracting 20 million additional funds from Washington in 22?
I'm going to see what I can do. I know that Senator King is aware of that request. I think part of, we're gonna try. I just cannot.
Think about for us, if you would, what could we show that would help him sell this? That, let's say that, and I got to think about this myself. What kind of a package could we put together that shows we're actually using that $20 million? It's making progress. We're working off our task list of the bridge. And this is between all of us. We're in a horse race with I-5. We're going to show them we're going to beat I-5 to the ground. So what could we do to package a sale that would make it easier for him? And then we got to go do it, of course. Is there something there?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a couple of things that I want to flag in that. So number one, we got $5 million from Washington State last year that needs to get deployed. And so making sure that whatever it is that could be packaged isn't like, we can answer the question, hey, what did you do with the first 5?
And we can do that.
Secondarily, and this is just sort of the legislative needle that we want to thread relative to that, I don't want to sacrifice, or I don't want to sacrifice $100+ million for $20 million on the front end. So again, I'm going to see if there are ways to sort of navigate. Ideally, maybe there's something separate from the legislature, just like Miles was saying. There is some programmatic stuff from the federal package that's just going to pass through to sort of the state agencies for funding. There may be some ways to program that separate from the bigger transportation package, which is where hopefully the bigger number will come from, and keep it separate. I just
So what I'm trying to do here, and communicating it very poorly, I understand, but if we start building momentum on this project, and we're going to use the first 15 to do that, and it's underway, and then we use another 20 million that we get from Washington, that's increasing the momentum. We add a little bit more from Washington State to keep the momentum going, and then we get the big money. So we're not having to do a dip in progress. We're pushing out, and it's constant and continuous all the way through. If that's what I'm looking at, to try and create this atmosphere of work. We got plenty of work. We just got to make sure the gas tank keeps filled up as we're driving down the road here.
Yeah, I completely understand what is trying to be done here. I think I'll do what I can. I think the challenge is that you have not only like all of the needs for new projects, but one of the challenges, and I think Oregon's facing the same thing, we also have, while the general fund in Washington State, and I've said this before, while the general fund in Washington is pretty robust right now, transportation is where the hit has come from the COVID setback. And so they're trying to figure out how to plug a whole bunch of transportation holes in transit agencies and other transportation modes. And the desire to put towards new projects in the absence of a transportation package isn't as high as I would like. And so
I get it. Brett, I understand the environment you're working in. You kind of see where we're trying to go, and I'm just seeking your help and innovations, and while I understand the other projects, really don't care.
And
yeah, but we're on the same page.
Project moving forward as much as anybody else, and if when there are opportunities to grab a chunk of money from wherever,
jump on it. Great, super.
I have a question. And I think this is what you said, Brad. This is what I understood you to say. So correct me if I'm wrong. That's why I want to get you to clarify this. The first thing one of the first things you said was you're skeptical about a big transportation bill happening. We kind of talked that there might be coming up, and now you are just in general skeptical about that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And then I've got one more question.
So let me explain that a little bit deeper.
Okay.
And this is sort of the inside ball politics around transportation. And that is, while you do have some tools out there for funding federal money, perhaps pulling some resource from the general fund, and then possibly programming some of the cap and invest money. In Washington, the primary source for transportation funding is the gas tax. And right now, there is no desire to push gas prices any higher than they already are. That's kind of a political sort of hot potato that everyone's trying to navigate away from. And so I didn't include that earlier just because that's kind of raw politics right now. But that's where you get a lot of my skepticism between not wanting to pressure the gas tax and the legislature going into an election cycle in November. Those kinds of things just usually create some headwinds towards big transportation package. So,
okay. And just one other clarification. I thought I heard you say that that Senator King is trying for 100 million. That's kind of the number he's got in his head at this point. But I think you said that it probably won't be coming our way unless there is money going to I-5 too. That it will be a package with ours and theirs together. Is that what you said?
So if I said that, that's not what so let me change the frame on that.
Okay,
We are separate projects. We're trying to make sure that we do not get linked in any shape or either in any way. I don't want to inherit the baggage from the CRC. However, what I am saying is that any major transportation funding for either us or the CRC is going to be linked to this larger transportation package, which is not just us and CRC. It will also be Sound Transit. It will also be other bridges in Washington. It'll be this bigger thing. And that we are all in that potential bigger transportation bucket. Does that
okay.
make sense? I'm not articulating.
Yes, we're separate, but it's either all gonna go forward or it's not.
Correct.
Okay.
Or the bigger dollar figure.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, thanks.
And so please do not go out and link us in any way and out in the community to CRC. That thing, while it will also probably get some sort of resource as I ended, we do not want to inherit the baggage of that thing.
Good point. Hey, thank you, Brad. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is the,
Commissioner Fox, do you want Miles to give a brief update on the Bridge Authority legislation in Oregon?
sure, let's do that.
I will be very brief. The legislative session starts on February 1st. The Bridge Authority bill is a committee bill in the Joint Transportation Committee. It will likely be getting a hearing in the first week of the session. So we will want to be pulling together testimony from some of you in support of that project and probably coordinating with folks from the Washington side of the river, just as Brad did in putting together the hearing in the Washington legislature last week. All of these meetings with legislators that we are doing with Commissioner Fox and Mayor McBride and Commissioner Benton and others about the funding from IIJA. The principal reason for the meeting is talking about the Bi-State Bridge Authority bill and developing support for that bill among legislators on the Joint Transportation Committee.
Excellent.
And one item too, before you move, Commissioner, just wanted to make note that Noah Noteboom, the journalist from the Columbia Gorge News, is in the meeting as well.
Okay, let's move to the next item, which is a discussion on the toll bond capacity study that Steve Siegel did. I want to change the approach here just a little bit. Just round robin for each of the Bi-State Working Group members, have you had a chance to go through Steve's package? Thumbs up if you have. Okay, looks like everybody has. Well, I'm going to ask Bob, and then I'm going to ask Steve to see if Bob interpreted it correctly. What did you get out of this study, Bob? What's the high points?
Well, based on the summary, and first of all, thanks, Steve, for putting this together. I think it's pretty clear. It was a lot of good information, but the way I understand it is basically that you put together kind of a funding plan by which if we raise the existing tolls by 2 times and then 10% every 4 years after, we can raise approximately by loan funding 1/3 of the cost of the bridge. I think the assumption would basically be the other 2/3 would be from the states and the federal government. Is that basically correct, Steve?
You're on mute, Steve. Steve, you're still on mute.
I think he's working on it.
I'm sorry, I had a little trouble there. Yes, that's essentially correct. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, good. So we asked Steve, you know, as an outside and a very gross basis, how much could the new bridge attract in loans and bonds to help pay for the bridge for the amount that we couldn't get through the feds and the states? And it looks like the analysis again says about $150 million, maybe a little less, round numbers. It would take a commitment of doubling the existing tolls on the bridge as the new bridge comes on, and then an inflation clause in there that every, what was it, 5 years, you bump it by 10%.
Every 4 years, 10%.
4 years, yep.
And
And that would,
those are just assumptions, right? There's a
yeah.
lot
So
of other ways to get there.
I think it kind of answers the rough question that we were asking. But as we go forward, we need to put together a real toll plan and a funding plan. And then we got to monitor it, that if we can't get a certain amount from a state, that means we're going to have to raise additional capital. So it's going to be a big balancing act from here on forward if we can actually pull this thing off. That's the way I see using this. Is that correct, Steve?
That's correct. And Commissioner Fox and I had a little conversation about this. I think one of the real challenges of the bi-state working group and the new commission when it's formed is to look for every opportunity to increase the fancy word, the credit worthiness, the likelihood that we can get loans at reasonable rates and reasonable coverage ratios. We're going to have to take every opportunity we can to ensure that we could do that. And that includes creating certain reserves and capitalizing the new commission so it in fact has some money when it starts up. And those are some additional tasks that I think will be focused on over the next couple of years.
Yeah, so to kind of end this particular discussion, we've kind of got a tidbit, but we got a lot of work to go over the next several years to bring all this into fruition. Is there any other questions that we have for Steve?
Go ahead, Kate.
Oh, either way. The bold that you put in your report, Steve, regarding credit worthiness, that is a very kind of a red flag. You made mention of it as a little bit of a red flag. And I think I've mentioned this a couple times before. We need more reserves because we don't have credit worthiness because we aren't even an entity yet. And so, that means we need to borrow more to have more reserves. So even though we've got the bridge build is X, we still need more in reserves, even more than that, by looking at what you gave us.
That's correct, but I wouldn't call it a red flag as much as just something that I think we're going to have to focus on. That issue is going to pop up in all kinds of ways, some big, some little. And we're going to have to be aware of that and do what we can, to get the credit rating. To get the credit rating, we're going to require to do the project. So it's not something. I mean, it is a concern, but I'm raising it more as just something that's going to become a part of your discussion over the next couple of years. I think in a pretty big way.
So if I could follow on to Kate's question, I guess what I'm not understanding is how do you increase the coverage ratio when you have only one purpose in existence?
I'm sorry, can you ask the question again, please?
Yeah, how do you increase the coverage ratio, or how do you increase, in some way, improve your credit worthiness? You described schematically how
Gotcha.
to do that. But given that that's our only business, it's not like we have reserves that we're putting aside for other purposes that we can use to support this debt. How does that work?
Yeah, well, the coverage ratio, which is the amount of extra money the tolls have to produce in order, to bond a certain amount, that's a way to improve your credit rating if you can't do anything else. And I've used a reasonably conservative estimate of coverage ratio here. But when you raise the coverage ratio, you lose bonding capacity.
Right.
So the point is to try to find other ways to do that, and the ways to do that. And I'm not, I'm not yet in a position to make any real recommendations. But when you look around what other people have done, what other commissions have done, they have gotten credit support, backing on certain issues from DOTs, from local governments. That part of the way to ensure a good credit rating is to make sure that that this new entity has all the proper policies in place and capabilities in place before it goes to the bond market. And so one of the things that I'm planning on doing under my contract, for example, would be to prepare policies for the new commission on a wide variety of issues to make sure that they're in place by the time we go seek a credit rating.
So did you just say that we should be looking to the state of Oregon and the state of Washington DOTs to back our credit in some way?
I have not recommended that. I have said that that is a method that has been used in other areas. And so whether or not that's an appropriate thing for us to do, I've not really assessed, but it is a method that has been used elsewhere.
Well, the reason I'm asking, so we're putting a lot of energy. We're going down this path of creating this new entity to do this project, and now we're learning that that entity, by its nature of being a new organization, is going to have some problems. What are you recommending then? Should we be taking some different action? Should we be looking at alternatives? Are there ways to mitigate this? Things that we can be confident in mitigation, as opposed to just making a list now and say, yeah, there are things that other people have done.
Well, the first thing that I've done is to include in the legislation, the governance legislation, a variety of provisions that allow for these kind of methods to be used to enhance. They don't require it, but they do allow for it.
Right.
So taking that step in the governance legislation, I think that then the next step is to begin to look at the simplest ways, if you will, to enhance the credit ratings of this new organization. It's not just the organization, it's the project, it's the financial structure itself. It's all three things. And so, for example, in the little example that I created for this meeting, you'll notice I used a 2 times coverage on the senior bonds and a 1.35 coverage on all bonds. The total, all bonds, the total of all bonds. Those are today, reasonably conservative estimates. So that in itself will kind of help the credit rating, at least on the financial structure side. So begin to look for the places that we can enhance the credit worthiness of the project and the commission now, And then when we get a little further into that, begin to look at perhaps the need for doing some of these harder things, such as looking for assistance or backing, and try to do that in as surgical a way as possible in order to make it as easy for whoever we're asking to help us, to assist us, to agree. And I think, again, could be using state infrastructure banks, that kind of thing, for backup loans. So it's going to take time. It is not something that I can answer today or next month. It's going to take, this is something that's going to take time. And, and as part of that, we got to remember that a lot of the, all the numbers you're looking at now will be changing over the next couple of years. You'll get new cost estimates, new schedules, new cash flow schedules, revised traffic forecast, interest rates are going to change, probably go up, hopefully not as much as everybody thinks they might.
Let's go ahead and stop there, Steve. I think what I'm hearing from you is that there's a ton of work associated with this, and we've got to get it sequenced into our schedule. We can't wait until the end of the project to deal with this, but we've got to be thinking about this now and over the next period of time. And you're absolutely right about, things are going to change on this project. Inflation could take off. It could maybe reduce. The whole value of the project's going to morph around as we go, but we need to make sure we understand the process and we're geared up to handle the process to be able to make sure we've got the money we need when we need it.
Mike, I think the question that I'm asking, I think Mayor McBride asked this at 2 or 3 meetings ago, is, are we sure we're on the right path with the bi-state, with this bi-state authority? Is that still your recommendation, Steve, or should we be considering other paths?
It is my recommendation to proceed with the bi-state commission. Early on, there was some interest on the part of the bi-state working group to have the dots play a bigger role. To date, they have expressed a willingness to help on technical levels, but not to take any kind of lead agency position on this. So it comes down to the commission or the Port Hood River. And frankly, the Port Hood River is going to have a lot of the same creditworthiness issues as the new commission. So I do think we're on the right track in that respect.
A couple things I've got. So if we, you've kind of listed some different things we could do to get better creditworthiness. And is there someone that we could talk to, like a bonding person, agency, that will say, do this, 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 this. This is the order you need to do them in. These are the entities you're going to need to ask to back you up?
No, not really. I think a couple of things. It's kind of our job and to come up with a package proposal. I think once we do, we can then seek and they use different terms, an indicative rating, a preliminary non-public rating, just to kind of see where you are. And I think we should do that. That's probably a couple of years away from now. And then based on what we hear back in that preliminary rating, we can make some adjustments at that point in time.
Why would we need to wait a couple of years?
Because I don't know if it's exactly a couple of years, but I think what we need to get to before we have sufficient data that is reliable enough to kind of make those kind of judgments. We're going to need the 30% design and the level 2 or the next step in the traffic and revenue studies. Those are the two major inputs into the financing structure. And until you get there, most entities that are involved in this kind of work, it won't take the numbers very seriously.
Well, I would jump in there. I think the estimate, you got a mature enough estimate to start that discussion on your toll study. Absolutely agree with you. But I understand what Kate's saying. Why wait? Let's get a feel for where is this thing? Are we in deep trouble, or does it look like it's going to work? So I think that's something that we got to consider going forward here in the next couple of months.
Yeah,
Not years, months.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with years, because if we find out, and you might not call it a red flag, anything like this that has to do with money, in my opinion, personally, it's a red flag. I would say that was a red flag if it was my personal finances. I'd be seriously looking at it very, very closely to find out, well, no, you cannot buy that new house, or you can. You either qualify or you don't. So I would want to look at it way sooner, because if it's not going to work, we don't want to go down this path for 2 years and find out it's not going to work. So I just don't see why we can't get some preliminary numbers on this. In fact, we did, as a commission, as the bi-state working group, talk about getting another financial opinion about 2 meetings back. Let's just see if there's other ways to do this kind of thing. And I respect your opinion, Steve. Absolutely. You did a huge amount of work here, but we talked about getting two opinions on some different, maybe some different possibilities. So I just want to remind that everyone here agreed to that. So I'm feeling like we're stuck again, personally. I think we need to move faster.
Kevin or Michael, has there been follow-up action on that request?
Not at this time. The focus has been on the, at least from my perspective, on the RFP, but I just wrote down to make that a priority.
Okay. All right, so by next meeting, let's make sure there's a report out on that, and what are the actions we're taking to go ahead and get a second opinion. And we're going to have to take this, I don't remember if we did, to the Port Commission to get approval for Michael to go out there and do this. I can't remember if we did or not. I'm getting old. But let's make a point to make sure that happens, please.
Could we just stop and I want to clarify so we're all on the same page. What is it that you're asking for specifically? Another assessment of the credit worthiness of the Bi-State Bridge Authority, and given the numbers and the information we have, what its a potential financing structure is for a new bridge?
Yeah, and I think along with that, Kate, correct me, is a timeline of, if here's what the schedule is for this project, when should we be starting this process? And given the numbers that we've got, which is Steve's got numbers from existing tolls, traffic, we've got an estimate now, which is decent. What's the challenge we face in financing the back end of this project? And what would they suggest how we do it? I think that's what we're asking for. Is that not correct, Kate? Okay, I got a nod yes on that.
Steve,
we've heard from Steve. We'd like to hear from Sally.
So Steve, who, in your just quick sense, who would you look to for that?
Well, it's something I should get back to you on.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay, move on. Item number 6, the RBMC RFP, first year work plan.
Mike, Bob
Yep.
and Commissioner Anderson also, I think they had their hand up.
Okay. Go ahead.
Commissioner Anderson, you can go ahead.
Yeah, my first question, Steve, thank you for the report. Can we get an analysis on how much that report cost us to make? I need to know that before I pay for it again with some outside firm or somebody else we're talking about. I got the numbers that I wanted from that, and that's that we could roughly raise 150 million. Now we need to go find the money on the backside. It gives us a ballpark of what we can actually do. And then it brings up a whole bunch of other questions. But before I bring somebody else in, I'd like to know about how much that cost us.
I will let you know. I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's put that as an action, Kevin, from the meeting.
Got it.
And Bob, you had a question.
Yeah, well, I think that given the conversation Steve's report that he put together, which was good, and that coupled with the conversations with the lobbyists this morning, or I mean this afternoon, the beginning of the meeting, what I think all of this tells me is that we definitely need a plan B. And I just want to make sure that as we move forward, if this path becomes not passable and we have to pivot to something else, that we're looking at a plan B. And I want to make sure that in our RFP for that management contract, that's included as part of that management contract is a plan B, most likely being a public-private partnership, and just ensure that is part of that RFP. So that's all that, that's what I'm taking away from this. This is an enormous, a lot of things have to happen just right in order for this current path that we've put forth to happen. And, given how easily projects can get derailed, they're this complex, involving this many different entities and assumptions. I want to make sure that we've got a plan B.
I think there may be some confusion here, because I heard what Commissioner Anderson was saying, and it sounded like he thought that the request was for someone to check Steve's math, and I don't think that's what we're looking for. I looked at what he presented; it's certainly within the realm of what I expected to see, and I'm sure that the math is right there. To me, I think what Mayor McBride and Commissioner Benton were talking about is mitigating the risks. Are there other paths that we should be looking at? Are there other techniques we should be looking at? Are there other things we should be considering to deal with the risk items that he identified? I thought there were 3 major things identified. Number one was the fact that the creditworthiness question. Number 2 was the amount of money that could be generated from tolls is going to fall considerably short of the amount necessary to build a project. So we're assuming a significant funding from these other public sources. And number 3, which we haven't talked about yet, was that the analysis he did of the amount of money that could be raised in the short term by a 10% increase in the toll for the next couple of years, which we're hoping would cover the gap for the engineering process, is going to fall significantly short of that. We need 11 to 12 million. It's going to generate 3.8 million. Therefore, the effort that we're doing at the Oregon legislature, with the backup possibility of an effort at the Washington legislature, those are, if we don't do those, we're sunk. If those aren't successful, we're sunk. Because this, plan A was to raise the tolls to pay for this. That's not going to work. So we're looking at getting the money from the legislatures. That better work. So that's what I thought we were talking about, not checking Steve's math.
That's what I meant. Just let's figure out, is there other ways to do it? Not checking Steve's math. I'm sure Steve's math is fine. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. Kevin, can you bring up the sheet?
Yep. Let's see here. We're going to bring up the work plan.
Yeah.
Let's see, not that one. Here we go.
Okay, and as I went through it, there is some things missing from it that got lost in translation, but the issue on P3 is not in this list. So maybe what we do is just take a quick minute, develop a project management plan, develop an AE design RFP package and get it ready for issuance. Conduct a study and recommendation approach to identifying AE candidate companies, short lists, the whole process for making the award. Develop a comprehensive communication plan describing how the project will engage with the public, et cetera. Generate a complete listing of needed permits, agreements, required interactions with the public and various bodies. If you stop doing that, I can read it. To generate the complete listing of permits, take sponsorship of the project estimate and schedule, keep it updated, set up project reporting and progress meetings, establish critical items action report and risk register, implement action tracking plan of open items as we bring them up and as we identify them. Develop a list of key land use needs. It's expected this list will be adjusted throughout the course of the project, but minimum identify shore access points for eventual bridge construction. Evaluation of 6F impacts to identify staging areas, and there's going to be a whole bunch of other stuff in there. Prepare a schedule and plan for south and north construction access, conceptual staging, et cetera. Develop right-of-way acquisition strategy. What's missing that I see is something like begin work on alternate approach study, i.e. use of P3P contracting. Begin work on bridge financial plan, amount not covered by state or federal funding. Begin work on toll revenue plan to support bridge financing plan identified above. Those are three major items that I saw that didn't make it into this list that I think as we award this contract, it ought to be in their first year work plan to push out on all of these tasks. So
Mike, what was that third one real briefly again?
third one,
Yeah,
begin work on toll revenue plan to support bridge financing plan identified above.
got it. Thanks.
And part of this, as we all know, we're going to have on the schedule a trigger plan that says, as of this date, we got to decide, are we going to continue with design build or are we going to switch over to a P3? And we've got to come to grips on when is that date. And I was hoping that we would use the replacement bridge management contractor to help us go through that evaluation. But we're ready with both.
The evaluation of the P3 or the evaluation of making the decision of when?
Yes, to all of it.
Yes, okay, both.
So when we first put this list together, we thought we were going to, or I thought we would have this management contract in place before it looks like it's going to be in place now. So if this is on a fiscal year basis, it starts July. So all of this work that we have here is first year, fiscal year 23, 24, no, 2022, 23. And we've got 12 months to get through this, where before it was much less than that. So.
Mike, the one I had is that there is likely going to be various grant applications. So having grant support.
Sure.
And I went through, when I was going through the document, I didn't see anything specifically called out on the independent cost estimating.
Well, it's certainly in the responsibilities section of that report. And it's in here, as far as I'm concerned, under takes 1.1.5, take sponsorship of the project estimate and schedule.
Right. It's just as we have various project needs and other costs, we just want to make sure that this firm can do an independent cost estimate so we know that the proposals are within the market expectation.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go back into the description of the contract in the RFP under responsibility section, under estimating, I think you'll find it in there. It's certainly meant to be there.
Okay, I'll confirm that.
Is there other items that we see that we want to add into here that we haven't covered?
Yeah, Mike, I'm just not following. Are you suggesting then that we wait until the management contract is in place before answering the question that Kate raised about bringing someone in to talk about alternate financing and to look at to look at mitigating these financial risks?
Let me see if I can put it in perspective, and I may be wrong here. The money that we're talking about is some of the last money we want to spend on the project, because we're going to have to pay that money back through tolls and so on. So the later you can use it, the cheaper it's probably going to be. So if you take this money and it's the last 150 million out of a 400 million project, it's probably going to be needed for dismantlement of the existing bridge and maybe 1 year final construction on the new bridge. So you're talking about probably years 29, 30, maybe a little bit of 31 in there. Okay, so if that's where we need this $150 million at, let's say at the beginning of 29, when do we have to have all of our paper and processes and everything in place drop dead to be able to do that? You want to have indication much earlier that your process is going to be acceptable, but when do you have to pull that trigger? And I'm guessing if it's 29, somewhere around 27, you want to be pretty well assured you can get that money, which means 26, 25, 24 is the time that we ought to really be pushing on getting this in place, those years. Now, the only downside to that is that if you want that to be part of the discussion on when you pull the trigger, if we have to go P3, my gut feel is 24 is too late.
Right. You got me baffled here, because what you're basically saying is 1/3 of the funding that we know we need for the bridge is something that we can reasonably confidently say we're going to get, which is we can raise tolls and charge that fee. But the other 2/3 are a big question mark.
Yeah, and we're going to know earlier. I think we got to know before we award the construction contract that it looks really good that we're going to get the money. And awarding the construction contract is in the latter part of 26. There's a lot of work that we got to do prior to 26 to get ready for it through design and RFP package and so on. But somewhere in 26, I think we got to have pretty strong indications that we're going to have that money.
Commissioner Fox, Steve Siegel, if you go P3, just remember it's going to be the P3 entity that's going to wind up putting together this portion of the financing, right? I mean, that's really what you're paying for. And if there's a gap, then they'll, of course, hopefully put in, their own equity. And as everybody here knows, that's going to be very expensive money, 10, 12% money. So the less of that, the better. But in terms of putting the TIFIA loan together and the bond financing, that really becomes the P3 partner's responsibility. In terms of timing, there's steps along the way. So actually beginning in, around 20, pretty close, Commissioner Fox, to what you were saying, but beginning in the 24, 25 range at the latest, we're going to start having if we're not on a P3 course, we're going to have to start having getting credit ratings, at least preliminary credit ratings, and making TIFIA loan applications and that kind of thing, which means you actually need everything together because it'll take a year and a half or two to work through the TIFIA process alone. So if you need money, if you know, the assumption I make is that you need all your money committed, not necessarily in hand, but committed prior to that notice to proceed. And so that would include getting at least approval on the TIFIA loan. And the bonds, of course, you can issue as the commission whenever you're ready to do so. But all the state money, the federal grant, at least that I'm assuming is part of the finance plan, and the TIFIA loan will all have to be in place, give or take about January of 26, if not earlier.
I think we're saying the same thing. We don't have to pull the trigger on the bonds quite that early, but we have to have our ducks ready to go.
Right.
And we have to have a fairly confident position that it's going to work in 26. So the real question, I think, that comes back to Kate is, do we have to get this second opinion in here before we get the replacement bridge management contract in place to help us, which still looks like it's going to be, mid this year is when that contract is in place. Is that sufficient? Do we still have enough time to do that process?
I think the answer is yes, you would have enough time. I can't, if you need some assurances early in that, that's a judgment you'll have to make. But in terms of process, I can't think of anything that we would be doing differently over the next 6 months, whether or not we would have that opinion, right? Because waiting until you get the project management firm in place, I think is okay, unless the committee needs some kind of check on this earlier.
I think where I'm kind of going with all this, and it keeps coming back and back every time, is we need to take this schedule. And I think the right people to do it is this replacement bridge management contractor. Take this one-page schedule and start adding elements to it as far as funding and these other things, and working backwards, not necessarily on a late start date, but understand the criticality of all of the steps involved. So we've got a path that we can follow month to month to month, and we know where it's leading us.
Yeah, and if you're interested, I have a preliminary version of that we can go over next month if you wish.
Yeah, if you could just send it in to Kevin and let me take a look at it, and we can share it next month. Is that okay with you, Kate? Do you feel comfortable? Or do you feel that we should expedite getting this second opinion look at it?
I'd prefer sooner than later. I mean, I feel like, and let's let others give their opinion on, I just don't know why we would wait. Everything's wait, the legislature next year,
Yeah, no, I get you.
I don't know why we would wait. I just don't understand. It just doesn't make sense to me, but let others give their opinion on what they think on that.
Well, I think it would be interesting, talking about Commissioner Anderson's question, see what this one costs us, and do we want to spend that money to go get another opinion today?
I can guarantee you're going to pay a lot more than what you paid for me by 2 or 3-fold.
There's so much background that we already have data on that this person can get. They're not going to have to research all that stuff. They just might have some different ways of doing things, and that's what I'd be interested in.
Okay. Okay, so by consensus, go ahead and push out and get a second view of this, this whole funding issue. We got a thumb up, thumb down. 1, 2, 3. Arthur, neutral, up. Can you see the rest of them, Kevin? Because I can't.
Yep, everybody, let's see. Marla, was your thumb up?
I'm neutral.
Marla's neutral. Okay. Let's see. Catherine, Mayor Kiewit. You're on mute.
I think the benefit to it is if it identifies a real problem, we've identified it early. And we've got more time to take action on it.
Seeing as I just got here, I'm gonna follow Marla and just kind of hang around for a little bit to understand the situation better.
I'm still having a hard time of what we're gonna gain. To me, everything comes down to we need to bring in $300 million. If we can't see that happening by 2025, everything gets pushed out, everything gets more expensive. Raising the toll bond revenue, to me, that isn't difficult. You can always raise your tolls a little bit more. I think what we need to realize is what and we will with the RMDC contract, but what the real thing comes down to is what actually can you raise your tolls to? What's the maximum amount you could logically do it, and whether we can do that or not. And if we can't, and we can't find the dollars, then we need to go Bob's way, and we need to talk about things like we're not going to have as big of a bridge, or we're not going to be building a new bridge. To me, that matters more to me than spending the time, effort, and value on trying to get a good credit rating when we don't even have our enabling legislation completed yet. It just feels like we're going a little bit cart before the horse. And I also don't worry about it because we can always bring on a P3 group that we can ride their coattails of somebody who's done it to get a better, interest rate. And then they'll manage if we get to that point and we have to go that direction. But again, we won't know that until 2025, because just based on the legislature, and as Bob says, we've got these big things, really big things that have to happen on the millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars. And there's 3 different entities we have to deal with. If we can't deal with that, I don't see what the purpose of seeing how much we can get in toll bonds really mean, or trying to get that rate low. I just don't see the value.
Thank you for that insight, Jacob. That was really good. So that being said, I agree with everything you said. But if we're waiting, we can't wait till 2025 to know that it won't work if we're going to go another direction, because then we will not have enough time to get the P3 in place. So I don't, I just don't think we can wait that long to figure that out, because then we've just lost our whole timetable completely. And then more money will be spent on the bridge that we have, which means the tolls will be higher on that and this whole project in the long run, and then it'll be torn down. So I don't think we have the luxury of waiting until 2025 to make that decision.
So again, going back to the work plan, Kate, we added 3 items to this, and it's really surrounded this particular subject where look at the alternate study using a P3P, which to me ultimately may be that we've got an RFP already drafted, written, it's on the shelf, it's ready to go. We don't pull the trigger until we need to pull the trigger. Begin work on bridge financing plan, which basically takes everything that Steve Siegel did and a lot more, and we get it into a plan that we're looking at across with the schedule. They can work on a toll revenue plan to support bridge financing plan. So in there, we're looking much closer at traffic and tolls and what could we raise the tolls to, and how much would it generate? Which all centers back on this topic that we're talking about. And if we've got it in the first year work plan, it should not go past the second year work plan. We can put whatever we want in there when we really lay this out to them. Maybe we give them 1 year to get a P3 contract ready to go. And these other things, we can put whatever end date we want to put on it. So I agree with you. I'm totally against waiting until 25 to figure this out.
I'm just curious if there's other ways to finance it, but if everyone in this room agrees, there isn't any other ways. We've got P3, we've got tolls, we've got states, and we've got feds. That's it. And we've figured out, X amount from each person. They either happen, they're not going to happen. We're going to have to come up with 150 million. Everybody's great with that. There's no other way to do it. Then we can wait. I'm okay with waiting. I just don't want to wait till 2025 to make a decision to go a different way.
We know that P3 is a potential alternative, but we don't have a very clear picture of what that looks like. And I thought that what we had talked about was having someone come in to give us a better picture of what that looks like, a better picture than we have today. We've got a few pieces, but we don't have a particularly rich or filled in color picture of this. So I'm not sure. I'm just baffled as to why we wouldn't today be bringing in an expert to give us a much clearer picture of what that option could look like. Option A is clearly the best one. We want the publicly funded bridge. We're working hard to figure out how we can get the 490 million from these major sources. But if we don't have some clear understanding of what happens if we are unable to meet those numbers, we've failed.
I was remembering when we did that, we had the P3 presentation a while back, and there was a person from Seattle area, I believe, a woman.
Jan.
Okay, yeah. And it seemed like she had a lot of information potentially about how this financing stuff works. She's worked in this field. She is not working for a bridge builder, but she has a lot of expertise in this. And I don't know if this is somebody that could give us some more, a better, clearer picture or not, but it's someone we might be able to talk to.
I thought after that meeting, we requested that she come back and talk to us. Does anybody else have that same recollection? I remember that after we had the meeting with the industry folks, I believe it was your recommendation, Mayor McBride, that we have her come back. And I thought I seem to remember that.
Well, I thought I remembered that we did too, because we thought, well, let's just get her opinion without the P3 people in the room.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly how I remember the conversation going as well.
And I think that she might be able to give us, some of the answers that we might be still have questions about, versus, another financial picture. I mean, it would be a financial picture, but it would be in a different way.
So let me, and Kate, as you and I have talked in the past, I went back and looked at that video from that meeting, and there was a lot of really good information provided, and this Jan was one of them. We could bring her in, and she's going to have the perspective on a P3. But I think the other question that we've got floating around here is, do we want to take another look at a design build contract approach, and how innovative can we get with that last piece of funding that we're going to have to provide? It's those two issues, I think, that we're looking at, right? P3 has always been an option as far as I was concerned, and we need to go study that and be ready to go with it. And we got to decide when we have to pull that trigger as far as actually converting to it. So the more we get smarter on the P3, that's good. This other thing that, Siegel just finished up, getting a second opinion on it is there something else? Bring in Morgan Stanley or Fox Investments Incorporated that does these things all over the world. That's the other piece of this that we're kind of talking about. And do we want to do that now? And Jacob's got some issues and Marla's got issues, and I get all that. What would you guys like to do?
One
ahead.
question that keeps coming up in my head as we're talking through and now adding another potential thing to consider is, why would we not get the RBMC staged up and be accounting for all this as part of that process? It seems like that along the same time that we're all, I think, taken by that presentation from the woman outside from the Puget Sound area, that some of the discussion too, as you came on board, Commissioner Fox, and where there was some energy, was that getting this management team in place is actually getting the right group to the table to guide us with some expertise on all of these decisions that I think we all, when we talk about this, come back to with these very important questions. But I lean towards wanting them in the room when we have these discussions and these considerations. I think we will land with better decisions and better, hopefully informed guidance from people that have done these projects before on what that drop dead date is for that P3 or continued, public funding approach decision. So I'm just hesitant to be bringing some of these things forward before we get that in place. I just worry it might distract us and we could still stay the course here and get this done. And that would feel like an accomplishment to us in the right direction.
I agree with what you said, Marla. And the other thing, that organization gives us some arms and legs to go do something with then after we've talked about it. We really don't have the arms and legs right now. So yes, the other thing that I see is between now and award of that contract, which I think Kevin's going to go through here shortly. We put that thing out on the street 1st of February. There's a whole series of events that's going to take a lot of our time collectively in selecting that contractor. Okay, and I think we ought to be putting our expertise and common sense and decision process and making sure we all get the right contractor that we feel comfortable with. And then we go. It's kind of, I hate the term, go slow to go fast. But we need to take this little short period of time that we're now about ready to dump the RFP on the street. Let's make sure we got our ducks in the line and all of us are involved in making that right decision of what contractor we want to go award. And then we start loading that contractor up with these particular issues. That's why we're hiring them, based on their expertise, and they can guide us where to go. We don't have to agree with them, but it's a structure.
I think I like the way that Mayor Kiefler said it. I agree with what she said. The reason why we're talking about this is, and with all due respect, it's just taking too damn long to get there.
I share your concern.
That's why we're talking about an alternative, because we're just tired of waiting.
Share your concern. So I would suggest we move to the next cycle. Well, we got to make a decision. Should we proceed forward and get a contractor in here to look at this whole financing issue again, or should we, I hate to say it, put it on the burner for a little bit, focus our attention getting the management contract in place, the right one, and then it goes on their list to go do early?
I would still like to have the person from Puget Sound, because we've had her before and we did talk about having her back without the contractors in the room.
Okay.
I don't know if we can get her to come and talk to us for 45 minutes, 30 minutes. I mean, how much would it cost to get her to come back and talk to us for 35, 45 minutes?
Assuming it's Zoom.
Yeah, Zoom, absolutely Zoom.
I'm not willing to wait another 6 months to learn that we've missed something important.
I'd just like to at least do that. I mean, that seems like a minimal cost. It wouldn't take a lot of our time or their time and wouldn't be super expensive.
Commissioner Anderson, what are your thoughts? You okay with that?
I think inviting her back to talk to us, even if we've got to pay her a few $100s, would, if that's what people want to hear from, I think that's great. But in order to go through another one of these contracts, in order to hire someone to do it, I want to spend our time focused on the RBMC so we can get that out, so we can start moving forward. And if you think, I know it feels like we're not really going anywhere, but from my perspective in what we've been doing with how many meetings we've been making great headway on the Washington legislation. And to me, it feels like we are moving forward because we're getting that ticked off what we're supposed to be doing. When it comes down to the funding, when I said 25, that was because when we were talking earlier, that's when you know whether these large transportation packages are going to go through or not. And until you find out if those are going to go through or not, that makes this a project or not a project. And it's as simple as that. Because if we look at, doubling the tolls now, we raise 150 million, maybe. And if we say we had to raise 300, you're going to triple or quadruple the tolls. I just don't see that happening. I see painting the current bridge way before I see that ever happen. Especially when you look at what would happen to the numbers. No trucks are going to go across the bridge if it costs them $180 to go across the bridge. So your numbers get all sorts of skewed at that point. And so that's what it really comes down to in my mind, is that's why I said, whether we hire a P3 because we need to use their facilities expertise in getting cheaper money, that's one thing, but that's still a decision that's a long ways off. Because when it comes down to it, it all comes down to, we can only raise about $150 million before things start going really askew.
Yeah. Okay. Others? Can we get a consensus that we'll invite Jan from Pacific to attend one of our next, hopefully one or two meetings, and give us a present and a big section of question and answers period for us to talk about P3 and specifically funding, tolls, how that works under the P3. One thumb, others, two thumbs, three thumbs. Marla?
Oh yeah, I had my thumb.
Okay, 4, 5. Okay.
Here, I'll double thumb. Here we go. There you go.
Counts 2. Okay, we'll
good.
take the action to invite her to whichever one she can get to, the next meeting or the meeting after there. We'll get her added to the agenda.
If I can add one thing, so when we sat through the P3, they also said they usually don't put a whole lot of their money into it, maybe 10% of the overall project. So if they put 10% of the project, I just want to make this as simple as possible. If they put 10% of the project, which is about $50 million in, and they require a 10+% ROI on that 50 million a year, like most private capital does, that's $6 million a year. That's more than we raise currently in tolls. So you figure if you bring on the P3 group, what we currently pay in tolls is going to be going to them just for doing their portion of it on $50 million. So that's why when it really comes down to it, that's why 2025 is when we'll know whether this happens for real or not. And in the meantime, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm saying we should be planning for what the port may or may not have to do if we can't come up with the money, because the bridge is going nowhere.
Yeah, I get it. An interesting discussion that the port's going to have to take on as we go forward here. Shall we move on?
My only question is, are we going to have an update on the management contract? Because that's
Yes.
okay, great.
Yeah, so Kevin, can you give us an update right now on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me bring up the schedule. It's been really difficult getting ODOT to commit to doing a full-throated review. They lost several people at the end of at the end of the calendar year. They lost a number of procurement officers, and they're in the process of rehiring. So, so I think that we will probably get a lukewarm response. That being said, I did build a relationship with a gentleman who is in headquarters in Salem, who I've been kind of going back and forth with as we've done the template. And he just told me, I just called him up and said, hey, can you review the full RFP? He's like, yeah, let me do that. I can do that on Tuesday. So I'm hoping that the group, Sam and his team, they'll look at it, and then I'll have this other guy in Salem look at it. But my feeling is that we should get something from one of those entities, one of those groups, by the middle of this week. At that point, I would like to take that agreement to Bill Oley for one final review. There's a lot of cleanup that needs to be done. And I would like to have that thing completely scrubbed next week. And so I think we can get close to having the document. There's a lot of other things that need to happen aside from the document, and that includes training for the scoring committee. I continue to get comments that it's highly unusual for elected officials to participate in those evaluation committees. And so I think we need to do some work on that. But the RFP in itself, I think, is getting very close. And I feel like we can do that by February 1.
Okay, but you've got a schedule that you put together that shows a number of dates between now and awarding the contract. And I wish you'd bring that up and let's go through it.
Absolutely. Let me just give me just a sec here.
The city had, for some things we've done, and our new city administrator, we had electeds and appointeds from committees that did, were part of interviewing committees. We didn't have any problem with it. It was just a mix of people.
Yeah, I think I would just recommend that if our attorney that's reviewing this document, keeping in mind that the funding is coming from the feds and from state ARPA funds, that we really want to make sure that this thing is squeaky clean, is above reproach to avoid any objections from the other bidders. So, so the money is coming from the feds, and we just want to make sure that it's free of any.
So Kevin, who is going to make that call that we're good to go from a legal point of view?
Regarding, well, that would be Bill Oley. And as he's doing, as soon as, I'm hoping by the end of this week, he's been very responsive. If it's cleaned up quite a bit, I don't think it's going to, he's very familiar with the document since he worked with the original drafts. And so.
And he really didn't have a problem with the original draft that you and I wrote, as I remember.
Well, keep in mind, if we're talking about the evaluation committee specifically,
yeah,
the RFP is silent about the individuals that would be participating. It simply says members, agencies of the bi-state working group would be represented in that decision making or the evaluation.
Well, the key thing is if he comes back and he's got a problem with it, please get a hold of me very quickly and let's attack this thing, because that shouldn't be an issue. And we can work our way through that. But keep going. Why don't you highlight the to-go schedule and blow it up so we can all see what's expected in the next 3 months.
Right. So here we go. We've got the release of the RFP. Some of this date for the pre-proposal conference, this is I guess was been referred to as an industry forum. We're looking at 2 weeks there.
That's a key thing that we're going to have some kind of representatives in that meeting to explain what we're after on this RFP. What kind of contractor do we want? What are the services that we expect from them? And depth and breadth of experience and so on. So it's a pretty important meeting that we should have some reps in there. Go ahead.
There's also been some interest during that staff could give an update on the project, just kind of give a project update. So some of the bidders may not be privy to all the activities that have been taking place over the last 4 years. So there's been some interest in seeing a brief update. But then after that, there would be a closed question period. Usually after that pre-proposal conference, any questions from bidders, just to clarify issues, are submitted back to the owner. Those would be, if need be, there would be an addenda released as well.
So what he's saying here is if one of the bidders has a question on interpretation of the RFP, they send a question in, we will have to respond to that question, and that question and the response goes to all of the bidders, not just the one. So everybody's playing on the same equal field. Go ahead.
Then the submittals would be due on March 14th. So that is basically 41 days from release to when it's due. Then we kind of go into this evaluation phase. I would recommend that there be some training. It'd probably be just a couple hours reviewing the guidance from ODOT. It would be taking a look at the score sheets based upon the criteria that we have been working through. There would be, probably the 14th or right around, actually, so probably closer to sometime between the 14th and the 27th, we would meet as an evaluation committee, share our scores. There'd be reference checks done just to make sure that all the background checks out. We give the bi-state working group a status report, and then the interviews with those firms that would be moved forward would be that last week of March.
So those interviews, guys, it's really important. So they give us a presentation on why they're the greatest thing since sliced bread, but during that presentation, we give them 2 questions. And we want them to work out a response to those 2 questions in the meeting and present the results. And the interviewers or the scorers have to look at how they respond to that. What are we looking for? Depth of knowledge, how they work well together. Is there some person that's really obnoxious and takes over, or are they working collaboratively to come up with a recommendation? So it's our only chance to see them under fire of how they're likely to react. And it can be really effective if we ask the right question and then we're really observing them. And then we cross-check our observations afterwards. Now we've come up with a couple of questions and we've shared them with a few people, but we've got to decide who we want on this evaluation committee. And I think originally we said Fox, Anderson, and who was the other one, Kevin?
Clickitat County.
Yeah. Wasn't there 3?
Yeah, I was thinking it was Hood River, City of Hood River, Hood River Port, and Clickitat County.
Okay, and then there was going to be some kind of what did you call it? Not a chair, but
a non-voting advisor.
Yes, non-voting advisor. And we need somebody to fill that group.
Yeah,
So,
so I think we've got, and so I think that I think we'll be able to at the next meeting, if not before I can get you the language, in the by early next week on what Bill Oley has as far as what the makeup of that committee needs to be.
Okay, so I would say in the next couple of weeks, we got to decide who's on that committee.
Yeah.
And then we get them trained up and we're ready to go with that piece of it. So keep going. So we do the interviews the 27th of March.
We do the interviews that last week of March. There's a window for any information requests. There may not be any, but there is a week in there for that. The evaluation committee then completes the assessment based upon the added scores from the interviews. Those are added then to the written scores. And then a recommendation is made to ultimately to the Port Commission, but there is an opportunity in there for the bi-state working group to review the assessment. But theoretically, if everything is moving according to Hoyle at that April 19th meeting, the Port Commission could authorize negotiations.
So then the selected offer sits down with the port and starts negotiating rates. And I learned a little bit more about this. These companies have to be signed up with the state of Oregon, and they've already provided the rates and so on. So the real kicker is looking at those rates across, the rates, are they reasonable against the Oregon statute? And then I don't know what else Michael's going to be looking at to make this decision of, yes, these rates are reasonable, the cost is reasonable, go ye forth.
Exactly. There would be, there will be a need to, as we looked at through those items in the scope of work, negotiating how much time for those initial tasks that will be taken. There will be an expectation that those tasks have some identified time amount.
Okay, so they would fill out the first year work plan based on what we've given them and what is their estimated hours and cost to accomplish that first year work plan.
That's correct. The hours are the number of hours to get those tasks are required. As you mentioned, ODOT does keep those approved rates on file, and those are updated periodically. So that is a good opportunity for an independent cost estimate. The bi-state working group, we could certainly give them an update on the project on the 8th of June. The contract would be finalized, developed with outside counsel, and then the Port Commission would approve the contract at their June 18th meeting, and then the NTP to follow.
Well, and again, if it's ready earlier than that, we can always call an early port meeting.
Yeah,
We
that's what I was
certainly
gonna
wouldn't let it sit around.
No, I agree. And that's what I was going to say. I just would encourage staff to use every opportunity to expedite this process at their disposal. And that would include special meetings of the bi-state working group or the Port Commission. In my opinion, this has taken entirely way too long.
Yeah.
And I would, like I said, anything, if you need more funding, whatever it is, to make this move along faster, let us know, or let us know what roadblocks are standing in the way to keep it from moving faster. But that shouldn't be waiting for a meeting.
I agree with you, Bob, and rest assured, Fox is going to be pushing hard on this thing. So if I look at it, the month of February is a key one to get this thing released. Let the contractors come in for an industry day. That's going to be really important to us. It'll start to gauge the industry interest in what we're trying to do, and I think there's going to be quite a few involved. Then the month of March is the industry putting together their presentation packages. And that's not any small feat. It's going to take them a little bit of time to do a quality product. They issue it back to us by early April. We've got, I think it's, no, March. They submit mid-March, and then we'd go through our evaluation in March timeframe. And by mid-April, we're ready to make our recommendation. And then the month of May and part of June is getting the darn thing finally negotiated and awarded. So I think it's definitely a doable schedule. Hopefully we can accelerate it. The earlier we get it going, the better it is, I think, for all of us. So we've got some action items. We on our team are going to have some action items that we got to be geared up to support. One is the industry day. Two is making sure we've got the right people on the evaluation committees. Three, those people have to get trained up and we got to get ready to go. And four, once the bids come in, just think if there's 12 bids, we got to go through 12 documents and score them out to down select to 3. So that's going to be a time constraint and time commitment there for our members. And then we push on to final approval.
And I think we're going to get a great response. I've been talking to about 20 different firms over the course of the last 18 months. I've kept track of who they all are. Many of them may pair up and be part of a team, but there is a lot of interest out there in the industry on this contract.
You said, if there's 12, we'd go down to 3. You're saying 3 because we're just going to interview 3.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll take the top 3, go through the interview and the problem analysis set, and then make the award off of that. My experience is we're going to get a lot of them that the document looks really flashy and professional looking at it. But until you get into the real interviews, that's where you're going to see if they got any meat and potatoes.
Chemistry, that's where all the chemistry and collaborative nature and all that sort of thing can be fleshed out.
Okay, so with that, let's leave that one. Let's go to 7, Kevin.
Yeah.
Which ones of these should we really be focusing on? It's 4 o'clock now. Can we do a real quick update on each of these?
Yeah, I can just zip through
Okay.
that and just give you just a verbal summary. You've got the report. Let me just get up there to it. The updated concept schedules, I referenced that at various times in the meeting today. Just we kind of put together a more accurate schedule. We do have a much more detailed version that's 3 pages deep as well. So we can certainly, if you're interested in seeing those additional details, I can forward those to you as well. The WSDOT grant agreement has been reviewed by the attorneys, and it is on the Port Commission agenda for approval tomorrow. We are just finalizing, the attorneys are finalizing the exhibit showing exactly what the $5 million would be going towards. There's a question about whether WSDOT wants to see the full 5 million or the full 15 million. So neither is, there's really no policy changes. It's more about how it's going to be presented in the contract. So I'm certainly feeling comfortable recommending that the commission approve that with the final legal review.
The challenge there, Kevin, based on my past experience, you want to make this funding into the contract as general as you can, so you don't have to have segregated funds, segregated timesheets, which is a nightmare for the contractors. So you bring the contractor in, he charges you $100, and then you say, I want 30% to go to this account, 30% to go to that account, 40% to go to that account for funding. Instead of trying to say, when I lift the pencil with my right hand, it goes to this account. When I lift it with the left hand, it goes to that account, which is, crazy, but I've seen it happen.
Well, and one of the challenges is that this is a very unique arrangement and thank you to Klickitat County for letting this happen. So the contract is actually straight from WSDOT to the port, and it's a reimbursement arrangement, meaning that we will need to front the money and then WSDOT will reimburse the port after the expenditures. will likely happen on either a monthly or quarterly basis, no more than monthly. But it really has to be auditable. And so, so there is maybe perhaps more detail, but it's no different than what we've been doing with the House Bill 2017 funds. And there is language in the agreement that does allow for changes to the scope and the categories if need be.
Okay.
Moving along, WSP will be submitting a work order request in February. We do need some materials developed that Federal Highways has requested for the meetings that are being scheduled with the tribal negotiations. We are finally got the Section 106 process, but there's been extensions on the review process. I do think it's important that there be some budget authority so that if federal grants do come out next month, and from all indications, it's likely that there will be a raise notice of funding, that we can tap into WSP to begin developing that grant application. We don't want to miss those opportunities. And with everything else going on, it's unlikely that I'm going to have the time to put the level of effort into the grant application as we did in the build effort. The one thing in talking with WSP that the executive summary, it was not included in the contract, and they did go over budget on that PCE, and so there is a small amount in there to finalize the executive summary. I believe it was like maybe $1,500, not a huge amount. And so that total amount is less than 175,000 and would be eligible out of the WashDOT funding.
Oh, is that's the old funding, not part of the new 15 million?
That would come, it would be eligible for, yeah, we've pretty much spent the House Bill 2017 funds.
Okay, well, I would suggest that we don't just authorize it right now. We got to pay for what we've got, which is the $1,500. But before we use them in the future, I would suggest we talk about it.
Yeah.
But don't write it right now where they can just go ahead and go.
No, that's fine. I think what my recommendation would be is authorize the budget so that, as for example, in the grant, when the grant notice comes out, we're going to have like literally 45 days to turn the application.
Okay, and that may be fine. Where I'm kind of going with this, folks, is that once we get the bridge management contract up in place, doing grant applications ought to be in their scope.
Absolutely.
Now, if we have to give them a change order because it's not in the work plan, fine, but they're our go-to group to do this kind of stuff, I would think.
Absolutely. And WSP is, this is a little bit of a bridge, if pardon the pun, but they're providing some of these services as part of the NEPA process. And because we're going to hit, the port's going to hit critical mass as far as what it can be producing as far as deliverables.
Okay.
Just one other item too, ODOT throughout the entire course of the project has been providing technical assistance to the project, certainly through the environmental process, but there's going to be additional ODOT technical review during the project development in the engineering phase. And that's really surrounding the build work. And so there is an amendment for ODOT, an additional amendment of 125,000 for the next 18 months for ODOT's technical assistance through that process. There's a standing agreement, and so this is, I believe, the fourth amendment on that agreement. And then finally, Steve Siegel's amendment is going to be included on the commission agenda as well. That was reviewed last month by this group. And I did confirm, based upon the working group's request about getting out of the contract. And I believe at last month's, I pulled out the language that says that it can unilaterally happen by the Port Commission to to end that agreement upon its needs.
Okay, and how much money is left in his contract right now if we don't add any more money to it?
Sure. Right now, there's probably, it's maybe 10,000. He's at the end, and frankly, I would have liked to have gotten this done at the WashDOT grant agreement done at the end of last calendar year. But again, this allows for Steve to continue his work, and the WashDOT funding, this is all eligible. Governance and finance is all eligible under the WashDOT grant agreement.
Well, my opinion on this one, guys, is that I think we're paying a lot of money for this individual, and I notice he's not on the meeting anymore. But we're paying him a lot of money. Is there an alternate down the road that maybe we could switch over to? I think so, but right now is probably not the time to do it. So as long as we can terminate his contract at will, and we don't have to pay any severance or anything, then the risk that we have is minimal. So we let him continue for part of this year, and as we stand up the management contract, we seek their counsel on how we go forward, and it may be that we consolidate and combine and do something else. But we don't have to make that decision now, because we do have the right in the contract to terminate as well.
So with that, our next meeting is February 14th. That happens to be Oregon's birthday. So in addition to another important holiday, but with that, that's all I have. And
I've got a couple of things here first before you jump off.
perfect.
I'm the port representative on the Energy Council, Hood River Electric Energy Council. And right now they're going through a planning process to look at identifying alternate means of transportation, power, et cetera. And I propose that we add a project onto their roster to potentially use solar/wind to power the new bridge. It's not a commitment, but it's an idea. And then as we go forward with this, as we get into design, we start a study within design. What would it cost and what's the differential? And it could be that we could use this Energy Council to attract some additional funds for us. No guarantee, but there's some potential there. And so what I'm asking the working group is for your endorsement to go ahead and add this project as a potential. They won't see the fruits of this until the new bridge is done in 2030, but we're moving out on trying to green up the bridge.
Could you clarify, are you talking about on the bridge?
Say again?
Are you talking about putting solar and wind on the bridge?
Yes, right. Of some manner, you know.
We went through this last time we looked at this. This is in the scenic area. The chance of getting approval in the scenic area is less than zero.
Yeah, it may be a very short study, but there's new technology out there as well as far as making it prettier.
As long as the first step is to ask the Gorge Commission, I'm fine with it. But when they say no, I don't want to waste any money on it.
Yeah. Can I have a consensus to at least push out with it? We're not making a long-term commitment. We're just saying we're going to add it to the list as a project. Marla, what's your thoughts? Okay, good. Jake, you're okay?
I think it's going to make more sense not to create the actually add the wind or solar to the bridge. I think it's more like what you do when you go skiing and you pay an extra $5 or $2 and you're buying it from an entity that produces solar or wind.
Could be. To me,
I think-
the issue is we got to design it into the bridge so it doesn't look like a slap-on project. And I don't think architecturally, I think we'd have a lot of problems just adding something to it. It's got to be where it can be designed in, and is that acceptable to people, and does it generate enough amperage to power the bridge?
So if we're talking about designing it onto the bridge.
Into the bridge.
Into the actual design of the bridge, you're gonna probably see this from me. We just put 12, or we're putting, 2,000 acres of solar panels down in Clickatack County. I don't think we need to add any onto a bridge, and the expense and the extra cost that it's gonna be for, I just don't see the value.
Well, here's what I would suggest. I could go either way as far as really doing it, but I think it helps us publicly to say, yeah, we'll go study it. We're not going to put a lot of money into it, but let's see what the technology is at the time we need it. We're talking a year and a half from now to even have that first discussion with engineering.
I think what Commissioner Anderson was just saying is that we could be buying the electricity from Clickatack County, producing it with solar energy. The fact that the panels are not on the bridge makes no difference.
Yeah.
It's certainly a lot easier to purchase them. It's great that they're doing this project, and we can get all the check marks that we want out of that. Doing something on the bridge, like I said, it's going to be a non-starter with the Gorge Commission. So I'm okay with you asking the question as long as the first person you ask it of is the Gorge Commission, because they're going to say no.
Yeah. Well, and if they say no, then we've got that answer, and then we go to step B, which is where's a power source that's green? Clickatack County. Okay, now how can we make that happen and get credit for it?
And there's money right now because the just direction of the feds for projects like this. So, it's possible we could tap into it if it was allowed. So it may not cost us any extra money because there's big grant money for these kinds of things right now. And we have Alexia Kelly, who's working on our committee, and she is very well versed in getting that funding. So I just think it's worth just asking the question.
So now this is stretching it out there. We're not really building a bridge. We're building a containment structure for solar and wind that uses the bridge as a maintenance route for supporting this, and we can fund it out of, I'm teasing,
I don't
out
think
of
you
this
want
funding
to
for us.
I think one thing we could talk about though is because it's a bi-state bridge and it goes across, two different states, and one state has sales tax and the other doesn't. One thing we could talk about is running legislation in Washington that would exempt us from the sales tax. When you're thinking $250 million, the sales tax on that is enormous. And we're going to have to come up with the difference in the end. Or our $150 million that we raise. That has more value to me than the discussion on whether we make the bridge a solar panel project or not.
Good idea. Okay, let's put that on the list and we'll continue to discuss it. Any other items anybody has before we close this particular discussion? Okay, with that said, let's go ahead and close the meeting off, and I'm sure we're going to be talking before the next scheduled meeting on a number of items, but stay tuned for that. Okay.
Thank you for managing the meeting, Mike.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.